one year of college at Oral Roberts University, but I always loved television production. I loved editing, and I loved the church. And I grew up running camera at the church and told my dad I'd like to come back and start a television ministry there at Lakewood. My mom wasn't real thrilled that I was going to drop out of college, but my dad said, Joel, just follow your heart, whatever you feel good about it. So I came back in 1983 and started the television ministry. My dad tried to get me up to minister. I worked 17 years behind the scenes. He tried to get me up to minister probably thousands of times. He never pressured me, but he'd say, Joel, you'd be a good pastor. I can tell. Why don't you come up and help me to minister? But, I had no desire to minister at that time. I liked what I was doing behind the scenes. I felt, obviously I felt comfortable, but I felt like that's what I was called to do. We'd go to India a couple times a year, and at least once a year on that long flight over, my dad would give me that same talk. Joel, you sure you don't want to come up and help pastor the church? And I always tell him that, Daddy, I'm not a preacher. You preach and I'll make you look good, but I'm not a preacher. So I like being behind the scenes, but in 1999, my father had high blood pressure most of his life that he fought, and he had to go on dialysis. And long story short, my father, let me go back to this. This is kind of interesting too. I have no notes, so I hope I don't ramble too much, but I'll tell you something interesting. So my dad called. I was eating my dinner I'll never forget it, one Monday about 5 o'clock at my house. My father was over at my sister Lisa's house. She lived about a mile from me. She was with my mom. They were just hanging out, having dinner over there. And my dad was 77. He was on dialysis, but he was still speaking every weekend. My dad was a fighter. And so he told my mom and Lisa, he said, I'm going to call Joel and see if he'll speak for me this Sunday. And my mother laughed and said, John, you've asked Joel 1,000 times. You're just wasting your breath. He said, I don't care. I'm going to call him anyway. So my dad called and said, Joel, why don't you speak for me this Sunday? And if I'd told my dad no once, I know I told him no 1,000 times. And again, we just laughed. I said, Daddy, I'm just not a preacher. Thanks for inviting me. I'm always very honored that you have that confidence in me. And so I sat down to finish eating my dinner once I told him no. What I did, a couple of minutes after that, I felt something so strong on the inside that said, you need to do it. I didn't know what it was at the time. I know now it was the Holy Spirit, but I went and picked up the phone and said, Daddy, I changed my mind. I'll speak for you this Sunday. Well, Lisa and my mom, they nearly passed out. That was on a Monday, and I'll be honest, that was the most miserable week of my life. I so dreaded thinking about it. I even told my wife, Victoria, I said, Victoria, don't talk to me until Sunday afternoon at 1 o'clock. I said, I'm going to get this over with. I'm going to make my dad proud. I had so many butterflies, and I got up that Sunday morning, and, let me tell you this, on Friday of that week, my dad didn't know it, but he had to go to the hospital. He's having some complications, and so we didn't have all the technology back in 1999, not quite like we have now, so we hooked him up by telephone so he could hear my first sermon. And so I got up there that day, and I was so nervous. My heart was beating so fast. I had to hold on to the podium because I was just, my hands were shaking. And my first thought that I thought when I got up, I thought, what are all you people doing staring at me? Because I'd never seen it from this perspective. I've always seen it from the other perspective. But I told some funny stories about my family, and I did my best. And I don't know if I did good, but people love my dad, and they said I did good. Anyway, I got finished. They were loyal. I mean, what can they say? But I made them laugh anyway. But after the service, I felt so relieved. I told Victoria, let's go to the hospital and see my dad, and see what he thought. He got to hear me preach my first sermon. Well, I got up there, and the nurses stopped me in the hall. They said, Joel, we've never seen your dad so proud. He's just beaming with joy.
Oh, man.